This is a barricade, constructed in 1871 by supporters of the Paris Commune, a revolutionary government that existed for only a few months in opposition to the more conservative French Third Republic. Take a moment to look at this picture. The men in the middle on top of the barricade, one with his arm raised high, maybe even smiling, the other holding a flag, the men in the foreground kneeling with their weapons raised, the people standing on the balconies. Eventually, the Paris Commune was utterly crushed. This, as best I can tell, is what the location of that barricade looks like today. After the fall of the Commune, 147 soldiers were executed at a cemetery in Paris by the French army, close to the site of that very barricade against this wall. A monument commemorating the spot where these soldiers were executed, translated into English, reads, "To the dead of the Commune." The story of the Paris Commune is, in many ways, an entirely predictable one. A revolutionary government took control of a city and was then crushed by a much larger force under the command of the national government. Despite knowing the outcome that awaits the Commune, despite not really having a connection to this event at a national or cultural level, when I look at a picture like this, I can't help but feel something. It's not hard to see a kind of defiant honor in the faces of these soldiers, in spite of the futility of their cause. Why do we feel this way about people who choose to go down fighting, even when there are other options? Why do phrases like victory or death, and better to die on your feet than live on your knees, inspire us rather than terrify us? What can we learn about ourselves from how we think about last stands? One of the most interesting moments in history that I associate with the idea of a last stand comes from ancient Greece, and it actually has nothing to do with these guys. What I'm talking about is the Siege of Milos, in a dialogue written by Thucydides, this guy. Thucydides was an Athenian who lived in the 400s BC and wrote an incredibly influential history of the Peloponnesian War, a conflict between the Athenian-led Delian League and the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League. Part of his history of the Peloponnesian War is the Melian dialogue, a discussion between representatives of the very powerful Athenian Empire and the comparatively very weak Melians. The Athenians, discontent with the Melians' neutrality in this conflict, gave the Melians a choice: pay tribute to Athens or be destroyed. The Athenians presented their case. "We shall not trouble you with specious pretenses, either of how we have a right to our empire because we overthrew the Mede, or are now attacking you because of wrong that you have done us, and make a long speech which would not be believed, and in return we hope that you, instead of thinking to influence us by saying that you did not join the Spartans although they're colonists, or that you have done us no wrong, will aim at what is feasible, holding in view the real sentiments of us both, since you know as well as we do that right as the world goes is only in question between equals in power, while the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." Milos, fully aware that the odds were not in their favor, declared that the fortune of war is sometimes more impartial than the disproportion of numbers might lead one to suppose. To submit is to give ourselves over to despair, while action still preserves for us a hope that we may stand erect. The back and forth continued for a while before the Athenians left the meeting. The last statement by the Melians recorded by Thucydides is defiant. "Our resolution, Athenians, is the same as it was at first. We will not in a moment deprive of freedom a city that has been inhabited these 700 years. But we put our trust in the fortune by which the gods have preserved it until now, and in the help of men, that is, of the Spartans. And so we will try to save ourselves. Meanwhile, we invite you to allow us to be friends to you and foes to neither party, and to retire from our country after making such a treaty as shall seem fit to us both." Though the Athenians would eventually lose this war in their empire, the Melians lost the battle. And Thucydides tells us that the Athenians, after this conversation, quickly annihilated the Melians and colonized the island of Milos themselves. So what's the point then? The Melians decided to fight a battle they were practically destined to lose and lost. If they had just submitted to Athenian control, they would have lived, or at least lived to fight another day when the odds could have been better in their favor. But I think this kind of calculated, dispassionate analysis of the situation really misses a human element. Plenty of other animals sacrifice themselves for members of their group. There's a species of ant called Colobopsis explodens, which, as the name might imply, has the ability to self-destruct, covering potential threats to their colony with a toxic goo. However, I find it unlikely that these ants, clever and selfless as they may be, are dying with thoughts of freedom on the mind. No, the willingness to fight and die, even hopelessly, on behalf of an abstract ideal is, as best I can tell, a uniquely human trait. I believe that one of the things that makes us feel something whenever we imagine a hopeless last stand is exactly this viscerally human element. At the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War, the British light cavalry charged the enemy. But that is not what was supposed to happen. The Light Brigade was supposed to carry out an entirely different set of orders, but because of a misunderstood command, they instead charged head-on into a fortified Russian position. There's an often misquoted line from the famous Lord Tennyson poem that immortalized this event called "The Charge of the Light Brigade." See if you can guess what the misquote is. "Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do or die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Now change that or to an and what happens to the tone of that stanza? From "theirs but to do or die," which implies that the charge of the Light Brigade was nothing more than a daring military maneuver, to the correct quotation of "theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. The Light Brigade, perhaps contrary to the popular imagination because of the widespread usage of or instead of and in that stanza, was doomed from the moment the charge began. But does that make their sacrifice feel any less heroic to us? Today, a last stand feels almost stiflingly sincere. In a cultural moment where every idea, action, and thought is analyzed, deconstructed, and reconstituted, the idea of an unironic, unadulterated, and pretense-free sacrifice for something that you believe in is shockingly uncomplicated and galvanizing in a really unique way. I think that's the value I feel whenever I see these pictures. The Last Stand refuses to diffuse tension and rejects compromise, even under threat of death. That kind of courage is rare. It commands our attention and demands that we take it seriously. The Last Stand makes us think not just about what the people doing the fighting were fighting for, but about ourselves. Do we have ideals that we'd be willing to sacrifice for, to fight for, even when defeat is all but guaranteed? Coming back to reality for a moment, we obviously aren't all going to be harmonizing with Jean Valjean atop a Parisian barricade, but we do face much less serious situations in our lives all the time. And determining what your ideals are, what injustices you refuse to tolerate, and where you draw your own lines in the sand is important to being able to navigate these situations with dignity, and to feeling good about yourself after you come out of them. How long are you going to get yelled at by your boss before you make a plan to quit and do something else? How long will you let people you're friends with make jokes about you that make you feel angry without saying something? In both cases, taking any action to better your situation incurs some risk. You might lose your job or your friends. But without a good understanding of your relationship to the ideal of respect, and without the courage of your convictions to take action on behalf of your ideals, you will, over time, lose your dignity. And how long is it possible, really, to live that way? At a certain point, I think there's a value in the willingness to say this far and no farther, even if it makes your life more difficult. If you can feel the courage in these pictures, if you feel like I do that there's something valuable about these doomed last stands that goes beyond just winning or losing, I'd encourage you to read more about them. I'll leave some links in the description. Come to your own conclusions about why these stories make you feel something. I'd also encourage you to think of ways that you can apply courage in your own life. Wrestle with what's important to you and what isn't, and for what reasons. Who knows what you might discover. Hi, this is Ryan. Thanks so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe so YouTube will tell you whenever I make more. Tell me about a last stand that you find interesting in the comments. Thanks again for watching.